Denzel had always been the quiet one. At family gatherings, he spoke less and observed more, and over time, his silence was mistaken for weakness. His in-laws dismissed him, his wife's brother mocked his lack of ambition, and even within his own home, his presence felt overlooked. But Denzel never argued, never corrected them, never fought for recognition. He simply waited. Years passed, and small remarks turned into quiet disrespect. Decisions were made without him, credit for his ideas shifted to others, and as the company grew, they celebrated themselves while Denzel remained in the background, unnoticed and underestimated. Then came the dinner. It was meant to celebrate expansion, a moment of pride for everyone at the table. Glasses were raised, laughter filled the room, and then, with a casual tone, his brother-in-law made a remark about how the company had finally grown beyond its old limitations. It was subtle, but intentional. Denzel paused, took a slow sip of water, and placed the glass down with quiet precision. Then he asked, calmly, "Do you know who approved the first investment?" Silence followed. No one had an answer. Without changing his expression, Denzel opened a folder and placed documents on the table, one after another. Contracts, signatures, transfers. His name was on all of them. "I built this," he said, his voice steady. "You just walked into it." The room shifted instantly. Confidence turned into confusion, then into realization. No one spoke. Denzel stood, composed as ever. "I let you believe your version of the story," he added quietly. "Tonight, I ended it." And in that moment, everything changed. Without him ever raising his voice, Denzel had always been easy to overlook. He dressed simply, spoke only when necessary, and never tried to dominate a room. And in the office, he was seen as reliable, but forgettable, the kind of man people trusted with tasks, not decisions. His colleagues joked around him, spoke over him, and sometimes about him, as if he wasn't even there. But Denzel never responded, he just listened and remembered. Years passed like that. Promotions came and went, always landing in the hands of louder voices. Meetings were filled with ideas Denzel had once shared privately, now repeated by others, louder, more confidently, and somehow more credited. Yet he didn't fight for recognition, he didn't argue, he simply let things unfold. Until the meeting. It was a high-level review, executives present, pressure in the air. The company was struggling, and leadership demanded answers. One by one, voices filled the room, uncertain, defensive, shifting blame. Then, unexpectedly, the CEO turned to Denzel and said, "You've been quiet. Do you have something to add?" The room stilled. Denzel leaned forward slightly, calm, composed, and said, "I do." He opened a file, not rushed, not hesitant, and inside were reports, projections, strategies, all detailed, all precise, plans that addressed every failure the company was now facing, plans he had built long before the problems even surfaced. "I submitted these 2 years ago," Denzel added quietly. They were ignored. Silence followed, no one interrupted, no one could. And in that moment, everything shifted, because the man they thought was nothing had always been everything. Denzel never liked loud rooms. He preferred quiet corners, measured conversations, and people who didn't feel the need to prove themselves. But that night wasn't about comfort. It was about closure. The dinner had been arranged by his former business partners, men who once stood beside him and later walked away with everything they claimed he never deserved. Years ago, they rewrote the story, turned his silence into guilt, and buried the truth beneath contracts and confident smiles. Denzel never chased them, never argued. He let them have their version, for a while. The table was set perfectly. Polite laughter, controlled voices, expensive wine. On the surface, everything felt normal, but underneath, there was tension, the kind that doesn't need words. One of them finally leaned back and said, almost casually, "Strange how things worked out. Some people just weren't built for pressure." A quiet jab, meant to remind Denzel of his place. He didn't react immediately. He picked up his glass, took a slow sip, and placed it down with precision. Then, calmly, he reached into his coat and placed a thin folder on the table. No sudden movements. No emotion. "I wondered how long you'd hold on to that version," he said quietly. They exchanged glances, uncertain now. Inside the folder were documents, original agreements, emails, financial trails, every detail they thought was gone, preserved, untouched. "You didn't take what was yours," Denzel continued. "You took what you thought I wouldn't fight for." Silence replaced confidence. No one spoke, no one could. Denzel stood, composed as ever. "I never needed to chase the truth," he added. "I just waited for the right moment to remind you." And just like that, everything they buried came back to life. Denzel had always been careful. He never rushed, never revealed more than necessary, and never let anyone see how much he understood. But that patience had been mistaken for naivety. Years ago, a group of former associates had tried to manipulate him, twisting small mistakes into major betrayals, confident he would crumble under the weight of their lies. They thought they knew him. They didn't. It was a rainy evening when they arrived at his office, confident, smiles forced, their voices casual but sharp. They carried evidence they claimed would ruin him, documents, emails, supposed agreements, all designed to force him into submission. Denzel listened, quiet, letting them lay out their story. Every word, every pause, every claim was exactly what he expected. Then he spoke. Calmly, measured. "You really believe this is new to me?" The room shifted. They paused, unsure. Denzel stood and pulled a folder from his desk. He placed it carefully in front of them. Inside were not just counters to their claims, but proof of the truth, contracts they forged, misstatements they relied on, financial trails that exposed their deceit. Every move they had made had been anticipated, documented, and nullified long before they even thought to act. "I've known about your plans for years," he said softly. "I've already accounted for every step, every lie, every attempt to corner me." Their confident smiles faltered, panic flickered across their faces. Denzel didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He just let the truth sit between them, undeniable and final. By the end of the night, they left with nothing but the realization that the quiet man they underestimated had been controlling the game all along. And Denzel returned to his chair, calm, satisfied, and completely untouchable. Denzel had waited quietly for 3 decades. 30 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. He watched as others took credit for his work, as promises were broken, and as his name was twisted into a story that suited them. He said nothing. He corrected no one. He let life move around him while he built silently, learning, observing, and preparing. Every slight, every betrayal, every insult was stored, not in anger, but in patience. The night arrived without warning. A reunion had been arranged, framed as a celebration of past achievements, but Denzel knew the true purpose. The men who had stolen his ideas, who had rewritten history in their favor, were eager to remind him of the place they believed he belonged. They didn't expect him to be ready. They didn't expect him to remember every detail. Dinner was served, laughter carefully practiced, and casual jabs thrown to remind Denzel of his past failures. One of them leaned back, smirking, and said, "Funny how life turns out, isn't it?" Denzel didn't flinch. He simply set his glass down, looked directly at them, and opened a slim leather folder. Inside were the documents they had tried to bury, original contracts, correspondence, and proof of every manipulation, every lie. Each page told the story they had tried to erase. "I waited," Denzel said, voice calm, unwavering. "I waited for the right moment, and tonight, it ends." Silence fell. Their confidence vanished, faces paled. The table, once lively, felt heavy with truth. Denzel didn't gloat, he didn't shout. He simply stood, composed, and walked away, leaving behind 30 years of injustice, erased in a single, quiet night. Denzel had carried the weight of the past quietly, letting others believe it had broken him. Years ago, a betrayal had been carefully crafted against him, friends he trusted, partners he respected, all conspiring to rewrite his story. They thought he would crumble under the pressure, that the shadows of old mistakes would define him forever. But Denzel never reacted. He observed, he remembered, and he prepared. Every slight, every manipulation, every whispered lie was stored, not in bitterness but in strategy. The evening began innocently. A meeting framed as reconciliation drew the very people who had once tried to destroy him. They arrived with their confident smiles, papers in hand, ready to remind him of the failures they claimed he had caused. They spoke casually, dropping hints, carefully probing for weakness. "Funny how some things never change," one said, smirking. "Some people never learn." Denzel stayed silent, letting the words settle. Then, slowly, he opened a leather folder, setting it on the table with quiet authority. Inside were records they had assumed vanished, contracts, messages, financial documents, and evidence of every deceit they had committed. Every attempt to manipulate, every lie they had whispered into the world, exposed in black and white. "I kept your version of the story," Denzel said softly, his calm voice cutting sharper than any anger. "I let you believe it had power over me. Tonight you will see the truth." Shock replaced confidence. Faces paled, hands trembled. Their carefully constructed narratives collapsed under the weight of undeniable proof. Denzel didn't yell. He didn't gloat. He simply closed the folder, stood, and walked away, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any revenge. The past had tried to break him, but the truth had finished them.